Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Vulnerability Weekly. This week has been a little bit quieter than the previous week. It's been less intensity around application security or latest big vulnerability after the Confluence vulnerability of last week. The Polina, as Microsoft are rushing to fix vulnerabilities across their infrastructure. Nonetheless, there have been some recent announcement about Synapse, one of the service from Azure that's been under scrutiny from OCA of recently of late. So Microsoft is being scrutinized, and a lot of their security practices are actually being reviewed due to the recent focus between Polina and the latest Azure or sequence of Azure vulnerability between OMI and SYNLAPSE. Is a new vulnerability disclosed by OCA. There have been questions around their security practice. Together with that, one of the major focus, I think, due to the impact was another WordPress flaw of one of the services related to WordPress, that is Ninjaform. And there have been several force upgrades in the past, especially the latest one with JetBrains and JetFlog plugin. There have been several of them being pushed by WordPress, and we're going to analyze the latest one that will result in a potentially takeover of the website due to a deserialization problem. If carefully attacked, a potential takeover with remote code execution possibility. There have been another, maybe not covered so much in the news, that we followed with 10 critical vulnerability. Couchbase, that is an Node.js server, recently disclosed 10 different vulnerabilities, including one critical and 3 high that are affecting their server version. They're under fix at the moment, but some of them affect the authentication parts, so they are to be watched and critical to be watched. But without further ado, let's dive in this week Vulnerability Weekly. So as I mentioned, Couchbase, WordPress, CISCO, SPLUNK. As I mentioned in the intro, SPLUNK has been in the fire for one of the latest vulnerability, even though already fixed. And then Synapse and Oracle Clouds, one of the recent vulnerabilities covered on Oracle Cloud. But let's start on Couchbase. Couchbase, as I said, is a server. It's a great and distributed database server with a server version, as a cloud version and a server version that you can deploy. And specifically, this one from version earlier than 7.0.4 have been affected by a number of vulnerabilities recently disclosed. 10 CVEs so far have been disclosed against this server. And there have been several that are medium to high to critical, so there are several variations, but especially the sync gateway with a credential not authenticated and not protected by one of the certificates, as well as authentication not enforced, and several patches and fixes that hasn't been enforced throughout. So generally speaking, bad practice. And because of this, if you have the ability to shield these systems from externally or upgrade them quickly, we recommend to do so. Ninjaform, as I mentioned, has been WordPress has been forcing and pushing an update on Ninjaforms, and specifically there have been a deserialization issue that affected a number of version of Ninjaform, and specifically imports for Ninjaform that could call potentially a number of functions in Ninjaform and trigger a number of vulnerabilities that could potentially result in a takeover with remote code execution. And again, there's been several force updates in the past, like Jetpack in December 2018, and Updraft, again, more recent. So WordPress is particularly critical because there are millions of installation of it. Specifically, Ninjaforms, there are being 39 million downloads and a total of 1 million active installations. So it's very, very widespread. And the challenge is most of the time it's used to capture customer detail. So it's very widespread on specifically the critical part of the website. From an infrastructure perspective, we will cover CISCO and SPLUNK. SPLUNK in their enterprise edition, so it will not affect the cloud edition, has discovered a more critical vulnerability recently. CVSS, I've included here the CVSS score and vector of that specific vulnerability. The vulnerability affects the universal forwarder, that is one of the modules of the Splunk enterprise structure and architecture. And if attacked in a specific way, the attacker will gain access to the instance. It is critical because, of course, most of these services are externally internet facing, and the vulnerability is easy to exploit, and there is an exploit available, even though this has been already patched and fixed in version 9.0. Now, caveat to this, there isn't any version or any patch right now available for version 8.2. So the only way to fix this particular vulnerability is, again, a critical vulnerability, is to move to version 9.0. That most of the time is not a smooth transition moving from one version to the major version. So plan it carefully, or if not, the advisory is to temporarily disable the access to the service, especially from an external perspective, or internal mitigate that. So this has been the advisory from Splunk across for fixing this particular critical vulnerability. Now, Cisco has recently announced two vulnerabilities, one affecting their email service and the other one affecting their small business service, with a caveat that the small business service will not be fixed because they are out of support and out of maintenance. Now, CVE 27798, critical vulnerability, has affected their email service, specifically the email security appliance and email web management. It's been recently announced the vulnerability being exploited, and funny enough, was discovered during a technical call with a technical system and has been already updated and fixed. Now, the vulnerability affects LDAP, that is one of the external authentication systems. So in order to meet this condition, the vulnerability and the server needs to have LDAP support enabled. Now, Cisco has released full disclosure, and I include the link in here. But then on the second side, there been a vulnerability on the small business router, RV 110, 130, 130, W, and so on. Now, these systems are out of support. The vulnerability is critical and affects the parsing of HTTP packets. So if you have one of these systems, consider replacing them or upgrading to a newer version that is currently in support. Now, on cloud, there have been two major discussions. One, the more hot in the news, is the Azure Synapse by discussion through Orca Security. Now, Orca has been particularly paying attention to Azure and testing a number of services in Azure. And of recently, the current vulnerability is code 7.8, but actually Orca has announced that the vulnerability is actually a bit more critical because enabled the attack in touching a number of critical services that leverage on this service, that is Synapse. Synapse is a data processing and module that connects a number of core services that process data. And the challenge of this is an attacker could get and compromise fundamentally SYNLAPSE that could lead into access to each of these services, the credential of each of these services, or potential remote code execution on the customer environment. Now, some of the services are actually heavily used to process data and to store data, and process data from external sources. So some of these kind of key data contain fundamentally customer information. So it's particularly, there is particular attention around this vulnerability, and there have been quite a back and forth between Orca and Azure on this vulnerability, and I've included a timeline from referencing the Orca website. The original website, the original vulnerability was disclosed in January. There have been several fixes and issues, together with the recent fix that Orca and Microsoft have agreed fix completed the vulnerability. Nonetheless, there have been a lot of scrutiny around the security practice of Microsoft, especially on this service that affect multiple customers, and in their cloud environments, there have been several vulnerabilities in the past that are affecting Microsoft service. Now, on Oracle, there have been a medium vulnerability, but it's one of the first that we've seen recently on Oracle servers. Is called, namely CVE 21503, is currently without a fix, and there isn't an exploit available, and the vulnerability is categorized as medium with a CWE of 200. So this concludes our review of the code of the week. I've included also a link to the previous version of the issue, but there hasn't been a week as hot as the previous 2 weeks of June with Confluence vulnerability. Nonetheless, there's been some interesting development, especially on the WordPress and the more recent SPLUNK CISCO vulnerability, and few others that are coming out. So always keep vigilance, always keep attention, records and register to our updates so that you get every week the latest vulnerability weekly, or review the previous one if you haven't updated your Jira server, your Confluence server, or any other vulnerability that we review and disclose. As well, let us know if you like it, what you don't like, and what you would like to see more on this review. We always pay attention to every comments that you guys make. But nonetheless, stay safe and fix your servers and subscribe to Vulnerability Week. This is Francesco. Have a great day.